If you ever lose power during an ice storm, do yourself a favor and don't trust the quiet that comes after. This happened in January, a few winters back, when the kind of cold that shouldn't be wet decided to become wet anyway. My parents' place sits in rural Ohio, the kind of farmhouse you don't stumble upon by accident. There's a gravel drive, a line of bare maples that clack together when the wind hits them, and then nothing but fields and a strip of woods. That week I was staying there alone, house-sitting while my parents were out of state. I was 25, old enough to tell myself I wasn't scared of the dark, but young enough to keep checking my phone just to see the screen glow. By sundown, the forecast had already been right twice, freezing rain first, then sleet. The sound on the windows wasn't a soft patter, it was a hard, pebbly hiss, like someone throwing handfuls of sand at the siding. Every few minutes you'd hear a sharper crack out in the trees, when ice added just a little more weight and a limb gave up. The porch light was haloed in a cloudy ring, but you could barely see beyond it because the air itself looked milky. At 9:17 p.m., the power didn't flicker, it didn't dim, it just stopped, as if someone had reached down and pinched a candle wick. The furnace died mid-breath, the television cut to black, and the house filled with that sudden pressured silence you only get when machines quit all at once. I sat there for a second waiting for it to come back, because that's what it always does. Then I realized the only noise left was sleet chewing on glass. I grabbed the emergency flashlight from the kitchen drawer and dug candles out of the pantry. In the country, when the lights go out, it isn't dim, it's absolute. The windows become darker rectangles inside a darker room.
I lit 2 candles and set them on the kitchen island, then pulled my phone out and checked the battery. 64%. Good enough, I told myself, even though I knew cold drains a battery the same way panic drains your focus. I texted my parents. They answered right away, bundled up in Florida weather, of course, telling me to lock up, stay inside, and not go wandering around with a flashlight like a horror movie extra. I replied with a thumbs up and tried to laugh at my own nerves. I even opened a YouTube video on low volume, just so the house wouldn't feel like a museum after closing. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. Motion detected. Back deck. The deputies asked me a dozen questions, but my brain kept replaying smaller details instead. The way the ice storm made the air smell like wet pennies. The way the candlelight moved when the wind pushed through cracks in the old window frames. The way the whole house felt like it was holding its breath with me. The farmhouse had always had its own noises, pipes ticking, boards settling, the distant whine of the wind in the silo, but that night the snow packed everything down so tight that every new sound felt intentional. When the power is on, you don't realize how many tiny electric noises fill a house. The refrigerator's soft hum, the furnace fan, the router blinking, the microwave clock whispering its little high-pitched whine. Lose all that at once, and you hear the building for what it really is, a wooden shell surrounded by miles of dark. Later, while one deputy photographed the broken window, the other walked the perimeter with a flashlight, sweeping the beam across the yard where the snow had crusted into a glassy skin. Each step made a brittle crack. He pointed out places where the drifts were higher, where wind had carved little dunes against the foundation. If someone wanted to hide, he said, this is perfect.
Snow hides tracks until it doesn't. Ice holds prints like a mold. He didn't say it, but the implication hung there. The storm wasn't just a danger, it was cover. Normally, those alerts mean a raccoon doing raccoon things, or a deer nosing around where my dad kept a salt lick in fall. But the storm was so thick that night, vision could barely see 10 feet, and that made my imagination do the rest. I tapped the notification and watched the live feed struggle to load. The router was down, so the camera was trying to hop onto its cellular backup, and the picture came in like a haunted television. A wall of white static, speckled with swirling ice. Then a darker shape drifted into the corner of the frame. Not a blur like snow, not a branch moving. It paused, the way a person pauses when they're deciding something. I leaned closer to my phone, holding my breath like that would help the signal. The shape moved again, slowly, and the camera's infrared caught a pale flash, something reflective, like bare skin or a plastic bag. The image stuttered, froze, and then the app kicked me out with a single line of text, camera offline. The rational part of my brain said, battery, or the cold, or the storm drowning the signal. But I was already standing, candlelight trailing across the kitchen in nervous shadows, walking toward the sliding glass door that opened onto the back deck.
I didn't turn the flashlight on at first. The glass was fogged with condensation from the warm house meeting the freezing outside, and I didn't want glare to turn the door into a mirror. I used the dim glow of my phone screen to find the latch. Locked. The bar was in place. The handle didn't budge. I exhaled and told myself I'd done my due diligence. Deer, raccoon, a drifting curtain of snow. Then, right as I started to step away, something scraped softly on the outside of the glass.
Not a bang, not an animal pawing. A careful, deliberate sound, like a fingernail dragged across a tabletop. I froze with my hand still on the handle, a palm pressed against the glass from the outside. The print was too perfect to be a glove. 5 long fingers, pale skin, pressed so hard the tips blanched. The hand slid sideways, wiping through the condensation in a slow circle until a clean window opened at eye level. And then an eye appeared in that circle. It wasn't scanning the room. It wasn't searching. It was already staring right where I stood, like it had been watching my shadow move toward the door and knew exactly when I'd look back. The iris was light, almost colorless in the night vision glow from my phone, and the pupil was blown wide, giving the whole face, whatever part of it existed beyond that circle, the look of a startled animal. I stumbled backwards so fast my heel caught the edge of the rug, and I went down hard on the kitchen tile. The phone skittered and clacked against a cabinet. I didn't even feel the fall. I just heard very clearly the soft, wet squeak of the hand dragging across the glass again, as if the person outside was adjusting their view to keep me in it. Then came a heavier sound, a dull thud against the door. Another, not frantic, measured, testing the frame the way someone tests a cheap lock. I grabbed my phone, crawled on my hands and knees, and bolted down the hallway toward the only interior room with no windows, the downstairs bathroom. I slammed the door, turned the lock, and braced my shoulder against it. In the dark, I could taste the metal tang of fear, like biting a penny. My first call to 911 didn't connect. The second did, but the line cut in and out, the operator's voice warbling like an old radio. I whispered the address anyway, and she told me units were trying to get through, but the roads were skating rinks.
She told me to stay hidden, stay quiet, and keep the line open. While she talked, the pounding stopped. The house fell back into that awful, insulated silence. Snow packing the world so tight, it felt like the farmhouse set at the bottom of the ocean. That's when I heard the first crunch of footsteps on the front porch. In the hours after, I kept catching myself listening for the wrong sounds. Not the sirens, not the deputies' radios, but the small things that had preceded the terror. The scrape on glass, the pause in footsteps, the moment the house went so quiet that it felt like a sealed room. Even once the police were there, even once I was wrapped in a blanket, my body refused to believe it was over. It's strange how fear doesn't leave all at once. It leaks out slowly, like heat through an old farmhouse window. The front porch boards are old, and even in summer they complain. In winter, under a glaze of ice, they make a wet, grinding noise when weight shifts, like bones moving under skin. The footsteps were slow, heavy, and steady, as if whoever was out there didn't care about slipping. The doorknob rattled once, hard, then again, harder, the deadbolt thunking in its socket. I sat on the bathroom floor with my knees pulled to my chest, staring at the crack under the door where candlelight should have been, but there was only dark. The operator asked me if I had a weapon. I looked around the bathroom like something might have sprouted out of the tiles. All I had was a cheap plastic toilet brush. I told her no. A sound like a fist hitting glass came from the living room. A pause, then the sharper snap of a window giving way. The operator's voice turned crisp, suddenly all business. He's inside. Stay where you are. Do not open the door. I heard boots crunch on broken glass. It's a sound you don't forget once you hear it, like walking on a tray of shattered ice cubes, except it's your house.
The steps moved across the living room, then stopped, as if the person was listening. He spoke, a man's voice, low, rough, the kind that sounds permanently dehydrated. "Hello?" he called, but it wasn't a question. It was a probe. "I know somebody's here." I pressed my hand over my mouth to quiet my breathing. My heartbeat felt loud enough to set off the motion sensor all by itself. He walked, not running, just walking like he owned the place. The sound of drawers being pulled open drifted down the hall, followed by the soft clink of utensils. Then a cupboard door creaked. In my head, I pictured him in our kitchen, candlelight painting his face,
fingers hovering over knives. The operator asked me to describe him. I told her the only thing I'd actually seen, an eye, wide and bright, looking through a circle on fogged glass. "Do you recognize him?" she asked. I almost said no, but then the storm outside made a long, rising moan, and in that sound something snagged in my memory. A few days earlier, in the middle of the afternoon, I'd gone into town for groceries. A man had been standing near the automatic doors of the store, not panhandling exactly, just loitering with his hands shoved into his sleeves. He watched everybody who went in, his eyes doing that same fixed stare, like he was counting breaths. When I glanced back, he didn't look away. At the time, I'd chalked it up to small-town weirdness. Now, crouched on the bathroom floor with a stranger in my house, I wondered if that was the first time he'd seen me. Footsteps came down the hallway. The beam of a flashlight cut under the bathroom door in a thin, moving line. The steps stopped right outside. The doorknob turned slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to make noise. It clicked against the lock. For a second, nothing happened. Then his voice came again, almost conversational. "It's cold out there." He sounded amused, like he was sharing an inside joke with himself.
You're lucky you've got walls. The knob rattled harder. The door shuddered as something, his shoulder, his boot, hit it once, twice. The frame creaked. A sliver of wood splintered near the latch and fell to the floor. I whispered into the phone, "He's at the bathroom door." The operator told me officers were close, but close in an ice storm meant sliding, inching, praying the cruiser didn't end up in a ditch. The man outside inhaled, loud enough that I could hear it through the door. Then he said something that made my blood run cold for a different reason. "You already checked the lock twice," he murmured. "You always do that." I went completely still. I hadn't told anyone I checked the lock. The camera was offline. The windows were dark. The only way he could know was if he'd been close enough to see me, or if he'd been watching me long before tonight. He hit the door again, and the latch side bowed inward. Something banged in the hallway, metal on tile, and I realized he'd picked up the little bathroom trash can and was using it like a battering ram. Each impact made the hinges squeal. The lock held, but the wood around it was giving up in tiny, panicked cracks. My mind tried to invent options and found none. The bathroom window was small and frosted shut in winter. Even if I broke it, I'd have to crawl out into the storm barefoot, then run across an open yard with no lights and nowhere to go. The nearest neighbor was half a mile of fields away, and between us was a drainage ditch that filled with ice water when the snow melted. The operator kept talking, steadying me like a metronome. "Stay behind the toilet, keep low. Do you have a second exit?" Another hit. The latch plate tore partially free. The door jumped in its frame. And then, abruptly, everything stopped. Not because he gave up.
Because he heard something. From somewhere outside, faint but growing, came the Doppler wail of sirens. They sounded wrong in the storm, flattened and muffled, like the noise was being pressed through layers of cotton. The man in the hallway went still long enough that I could hear him breathing again. "Seriously?" he hissed, as if the police were being rude. He stepped away, boots crunching on the splinters he'd made. I heard him jog down the hall, then the living room floorboards creak as he crossed them. A second later, the front door groaned open and a blast of wind dumped icy air into the house. The door slammed, either by his hand or by the storm. The operator told me not to come out until officers announced themselves. I stayed on the floor, staring at the ruined door, trying to force air into my lungs without making noise. Outside, voices shouted, "Sheriff's Department! Hands where we can see them!" There was no reply. Then came movement on the porch, fast, slipping, a grunt, a curse. The sound of something or someone hitting the porch rail. A taser popped, a sharp snapping buzz that cut through the storm like a camera flash you can hear. Immediately after, a body thudded onto wood. "We've got him," a voice yelled. Another voice, closer, called into the house. "Ma'am, if you're inside, identify yourself." My throat was so tight I could barely speak. I managed to say my name and that I was in the bathroom. Footsteps approached, different footsteps, multiple pairs, brisk and practiced. A flashlight beam slid under the bathroom door. "Okay," the deputy said, calmer now. "Unlock the door and step out slowly. We're right here." I unlocked it with shaking fingers. The door swung inward and revealed two deputies in winter gear, faces flushed from the cold. Behind them, the hallway looked like a crime scene in miniature. Wood chips scattered on the floor,
the bathroom doors scarred and bowed.
They walked me into the kitchen and sat me at the table, wrapping a thick blanket around my shoulders. One deputy asked if I was hurt. I kept saying no, but my hands were trembling so hard the candle flame jittered. Through the front window, now a jagged mouth of broken glass covered with a tarp, they'd set up a cruiser light that pulsed blue across the snow. Another deputy came in, stomping ice off his boots. "We caught him trying to cut through the side yard," he said, like he knew where to run. They brought the man up the porch steps a few minutes later, cuffed, shoulders hunched against the cold, hair wet with frozen rain. He kept his face tilted down until he passed me, and then, as if he couldn't help himself, he looked up. It was the eye from the glass, exactly. And when it met mine, he smiled. Not a big grin, just a thin line that said he was memorizing me. "You okay?" one deputy asked sharply, stepping between us. The man didn't resist. He didn't swear. He just said softly, like he was correcting a mistake, "You weren't supposed to call. The storm was supposed to keep you quiet." After they took him away, the deputies stayed until a tow truck arrived to clear the road, and my parents could reach a neighbor to check on me. The sheriff's deputy explained that the man's name was Nolan, at least that's what his ID said, and that he'd been picked up twice in nearby counties for burglary. But what bothered the deputy wasn't the break-in itself. It was how the guy had chosen the night. He didn't just stumble onto your house, the deputy told me. He knew the power would go. He knew response would be delayed. That's planning. They found footprints by the back deck that didn't come from the driveway. They came from the tree line, cutting across the field like he'd been waiting out there for hours. And under the porch swing, half buried in drifted sleet, one deputy found a cheap disposable phone wrapped in a grocery bag to keep it dry.
It was powered off, but it had one saved note. The deputy didn't let me read the whole thing. He just told me the first line, because he thought I deserved to know why the hair on my arms wouldn't lie flat anymore. It said, "When the house goes quiet, she walks to the glass." My parents insisted I come stay in town the next day, but I had to go back to the farmhouse once the roads cleared, just to collect clothes and lock everything down. The power was back on by then. The furnace hummed. The lights worked. Normal life had returned in the most insulting way, like the night before had been a dream the house didn't even remember. In the daylight, the back deck looked harmless. The sliding door was intact, still fogging slightly from the difference in temperature. But when I knelt and looked closely at the glass, I found a faint smear where condensation had been wiped away. A partial palm print, not fully visible, like the residue of someone's skin oils had sunk into the surface. I told myself it would fade. Sunlight and glass cleaner and time would erase it. It didn't. Weeks later, after the ice melted and the yard turned to mud and then to early spring grass, that mark was still there in the right light, a ghostly oval with the suggestion of fingers. My dad said it was just residue and I was looking for it because my mind needed a souvenir. Maybe he was right. But one night in March, long after the storm, I was back in my apartment in town. I got ready for bed, checked my locks once, then, without thinking, checked them again. I laughed at myself in the dark. Trauma habit, I thought. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with a push notification from my apartment's new security app, the one I'd installed because I couldn't stand not knowing. Motion detected. Balcony door. I stared at the screen, waiting for the live feed to load, telling myself it was a branch, or wind, or a software glitch. The camera connected instantly, crisp and clear. No storm, no static, just my small balcony, lit by the amber glow of a streetlight. There was nothing there. Then, slowly, from the left edge of the frame, a hand rose into view and pressed against the glass.